Hey everyone, welcome and thank you for coming. We have put together an all-volunteer panel of 5 people, 2 GCs, 2 retained recruiters, and a flexible talent expert today to help all of you a little bit with your job searches and share some perspectives and hopefully some insights on today's evolving legal job market. Everybody here is a volunteer. Nobody's being paid for their appearance, and there are no, if we mention a product or service along the way, that's just people's opinions and information. There's no paid placements associated with all of this. And of course, this is always the case with these webinars. Our opinions are our opinions, and they're not anybody else's opinions unless we say otherwise. So with all of the happy fun ball style disclaimers up front, why don't we get down to it and actually meet our panelists, which we will do in alphabetical order by last name, which means I get to go first. So besides serving as your moderator today, my name is Ron Bell. I am the Chief Legal and Administrative Officer of Collective Health, which is a digital health technology startup that services employer self-funded health plans throughout the United States. And immediately prior to being at Collective Health, I was one of the GCs of Yahoo when it was a publicly traded company. I have been out and about in house legal in the Bay Area for pretty much close to 30 years now, which means I've been at public and private companies, large and small companies. I've seen a lot of industry changes and trends. I've repositioned myself in my career many times. I've been an IP lawyer, a legal ops expert, a transactions lawyer, a product lawyer, a bunch of different roles. And I've hired hundreds of people along the way and had the pleasure to meet a lot of talent as I went through those roles. So I'm looking forward to bringing all of those perspectives to today's conversation and chatting with my fellow co-panelists. And with that, I will turn it over to Anna.
Thank you, Ron. I am Anna Gorodetsky, and I'm a partner in the San Francisco office of Major Lindsay in Africa. I sit on the in-house counsel side of things. So I place lawyers exclusively in-house across every imaginable industry, from financial services and technology to life sciences, manufacturing, renewable energy, you name it. I would say about half of my search work over the last 3 to 5 years has been general counsel level. However, I've placed lawyers as junior as 3 to 5 years out of law school, and really enjoy this work. I kind of grew up as a labor and employment attorney at Morrison and Foerster, we'd love to turn it over to Mark Kahn.
Hey, thanks, Anna and Ron, everybody. I'm Mark Kahn. I think I have more career transitions than even Ron does, especially when you talk about leaving the law and coming back to it and dabbling in exec recruiting for a hot minute. I am currently, I have 2 or 3 roles right now. Mainly, I am the general counsel and public address announcer for the Oakland Ballers, a independent league baseball team playing in Oakland, seeking to fill the void of baseball that has been left as the Oakland A's have decamped to Sacramento, Las Vegas, and parts unknown. Before that, I spent most of my career in tech, including working for Ron at Yahoo, gravitated more towards the startup world, was at WhatsApp and Segment. So my last job in tech was at Segment, and then we got acquired by Twilio, and I stuck around for about a year and then moved on. And then the other thing I spend time doing is my wife owns and operates a bakery in San Francisco that I help to do stuff at from time to time. And do stuff means a lot of different things, but it's a ton of fun. And with that, I will give it over to Shannon.
Hi there, I'm Shannon Murphy. I'm the Vice President of Recruiting at Paragon Legal. Paragon's focus, as well as the focus of my career for the last 15 years, has been on the placement of attorneys and other legal professionals on in-house legal teams across industries, across practice areas, across the US. Prior to Paragon, I was with MLA for a number of years, where I had the good fortune of being Anna's colleague. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hi, everyone. My name's Kerwin, and I'm the Managing Director of Kerwin, and we are an executive search firm that builds legal teams across all industries. We just do in-house legal recruiting. And generally, our mission is to partner closely with our clients, but also we're super committed to elevating individuals' careers. I've been in the business, legal recruiting business in the Bay Area for over 35 years. And my hope today is that we can just offer a few nuggets of advice and maybe just perspective about what we're seeing in the legal market to help anyone looking to make a transition.
Perfect. Well, then let's get down to the content. So a couple of years ago, most of the people on this webinar actually put on another webinar. That's what's shown on the right there. And in that one, we talked about things like crafting elevator pitches and identifying market opportunities and how to optimize your LinkedIn and profile and write resumes and so on and so forth. We're by and large not going to touch on the same content today. We may incidentally when we get to AI because that's so relevant to some of these topics. But we do have that webinar still up on the internet and it's still relevant. So if that's information that's of use to you, you can just go ahead and do a screenshot right now of that. And I'll also drop that into the URL into the channel in a little bit as we go. But today our focus is going to be on the left side of the screen, which is talking about market trends and job search timelines, transferable skills, how do you reinvent your career, how do you take advantage of flexible talent opportunities, and how do you handle employment gaps? In other words, some of those more complex topics that people may be facing at this stage of the process. Now, as moderator, I have put together some questions for our panelists just to keep the discussion flowing and try to move through those topics, but we totally want to hear from you. That is why we are here. So as it says on the screen, just tap that Q&A button and you can type a question in and we'll moderate that and keep an eye on it. And try to get to as many of your questions as we can. So with that, I am going to drop out of projection mode and we are going to get right down to it. And as Mark might say, we're going to play ball. And the first pitch, Anne, goes to you, which is what is going on right now in the market? Like, what can you tell us that'll be helpful? And how long are searches taking? And what are people looking for?
I think it's for sure it's been an interesting job market. And I think while there's been a lot of restructurings and layoffs and that we've all seen and talked to this talent, there's a lot we've got to keep in mind. There's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of growth, there's a lot of people moving around. So while people, it's important right now not to get so hung up in the negative and focus on the positive, because I feel like this job market is a little bit like the horse being held in a stall that just wants to race, and it's going to open up. I really feel like it's going to open up, and I felt that way at the beginning of the year, and then with the new administration and the uncertainty, things started to stall a little bit again. I think the candidates need to keep in mind the following, that the leadership, the general counsels, and Anna can probably speak to this too. There's always the great candidates looking for the nugget or the wonderful next role. So that's always competitive, and it's competitive right now. I think where we're seeing a lot of talent is at the DGC and the AGC levels. People may have want to move or they've been laid off. And so when you're looking at a late stage company and you're interviewing for that role and or a public company, there may be a lot of competition, and it kind of is what it is. I think one of the most important things that I'm hearing a lot of is location, and companies want people back in an office. And I thought this might happen, and I've seen it before, but people who've moved out of the area or move away from hubs are being called back to hubs if they want to make a job transition, because they're not finding the jobs in the area where they've moved. So those are a few thoughts just right off the bat.
Anna, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Very much aligned here with Anne. I mean, despite major negative headwinds, both geopolitically, economically, I took a look at the numbers, like year to date this year versus last year, and we have done better year to date this year than last year. So specifically, we have done 50% more searches this year than last year, and more than 200% more GC searches year to date than last year, right? Skill sets that we're seeing in demand, IP by far for us has been number one, both patent prosecution as well as transactional IP work, as well as IP litigation. We've seen product and privacy. Privacy sometimes is bucketed with product, sometimes it's bucketed with regulatory, sometimes with commercial, but some variation on the theme of privacy is also quite common. Compliance, both in financial services and in life sciences and, in fintech as well. Regulatory, litigation, these are the skill sets that we've seen most of. And frankly, more litigation than we have seen ever before, which is probably not surprising. As far as industries, I took a look at the numbers, and interestingly, despite the biotech and healthcare market going through some significant challenges, the vast majority of our Bay Area searches at Major Lindsay in Africa have been in healthcare, life sciences, digital health, some variation on the theme, followed by financial services and fintech, followed by tech and consumer companies. Searches are still taking, I would say, on average 3 to 4 months. But again, remember, we are retained and exclusive, so companies pay a premium to go through a process that's very methodical. They want to make sure that they, cross all the T's and dot all their I's, and we help them do that. There is a less strong focus, I would say, on DE&I, although we do still have some clients that very much want a diverse slate. I would say, dovetailing with what Anne said, we are seeing a much stronger ask for coming back to the office. I would say the new normal is 3 to 4 days per week in the office. And that really goes for roles of different levels, from GC all the way down to, senior counsel roles that we're filling. Compensation hasn't changed much since last year for pretty much any level role. I would say, other than compliance, especially chief compliance officers. We've recently done some benchmarking, and for comp, and what we've seen is the CCO compensation has grown more so than any other compensation for any other legal professionals over the last year or so. As far as GC searches, which happen to be my bread and butter, we have worked this year on founder-led, on VC, on private equity, as well as pubco GC searches. We've done it all this year already. I would say industry experience remains a key criterion, right? So if a client is a SaaS company, they want someone with strong SaaS experience, and they're going to be very unlikely to go for someone who checks every other box other than industry. And we've seen that in tech, we've seen that in financial services and life sciences. Our clients are looking for expertise in that particular area. Companies are still looking, as far as GCs, for a mile wide and a few feet deep, other than maybe a few key areas where they want more than just a few feet deep, right? Like experience taking a company public or being at the helm of a public company are still very important for both late stage private and public companies. Companies usually want a player coach who is both tactical and strategic. They really want a true partner to the business. And I'm sure Anne will agree with me on this. Every GC we meet is going to say that they're super strategic. They're a very good partner to the business, but we both know that is not always the case. So they need to have demonstrable, proof points around driving strategic transactions, having that commercial acumen. I would say dealing with crises is becoming more and more of a theme. So whether it be board member or executive leadership changes, or it be bed the company litigation or activist shareholders, our clients are looking for general counsels who have that experience. These are just some trends.
So let's drop it down a couple of levels, because I'm guessing that there's some folks here who are prospective GCs or GCs making transitions, but there also may be government lawyers making transitions and folks at other levels in the legal organization. I think I hear you both saying that adaptability right now is key, but I also heard you say that there was a certain amount of focus, at least in the initial hiring right now, on certain specialization. So let's explore that for a second. Let's say I'm a transactional lawyer and I want to get into more product counseling because I think, one, there's more roles, and two, I think that's a natural transition because I was also supporting the business. Should I be looking, how can I make that transition and demonstrate and shorten the search? Should I be looking at getting a certification? Let's say I'm not a privacy lawyer, but should I be looking for a CIPP-US or CIPPE, one of those certifications, or something in the AI space to try to prove to the future employer that I've got the chops? How can I accelerate my search?
I definitely think that studying and learning is always great.
Mhm.
But I mean, you look at the market now and the trend in probably the last 6 years, a lot of IP litigators, for example, have become product attorneys, right? Because of their IP knowledge, their knowledge of engineering products, et cetera. So I think generally it's not so much about getting a certificate, but being able to speak to the business, having all the soft skills and the smarts to get up to speed on whatever it is.
Mhm.
It is, there are points that where there aren't enough product lawyers or there aren't enough privacy lawyers, and hiring entities are flexible, and you're connecting with someone and you've got the right acumen, you've got the right smarts, and they're willing to take a risk on you. I
Mhm.
think sometimes when people say, "Oh, I got my CIPP," and they're just like completely in left field doing something different. It's like you've got to have more than that. You've got to be able to tell the story to get across the bridge a
Mhm.
little bit. I don't know if Anna has any other thoughts.
I agree. I think learning is great. So if you're getting it just so that you can be more informed on these issues, but if you think that just having CIPP without actual work experience or something transferable from what you've done before is going to get you through the door, it won't. And frankly, let's be honest, it's still very much more an employer's market than it is a candidate's market now. And if you're competing against folks who have the exact experience that the employer is looking for, unless you have a connection somehow to that employer or are somehow able to make a pitch for how your experience, even though it's not directly on point, is still transferable and parallel, and where you bring other things to the table and are able to see things through a lens that's accretive, it's going to be really hard. And it's just the truth of it.
Can I weigh in here?
I was going to go to you next anyway, so yeah, that's perfect.
I mean, not to pile on, but I think what Anna and Ann both got at was like, look, I'm a little cynical on these things. A certificate is great. It's not, and the learning is really important, but what I would call a naked certificate in whatever it is, privacy, security, whatever, is not going to get you very far unless you've been able to sort of take that and then pick up extra projects or something that allows you to demonstrate, hey, I've got this CIPP certification now, and now even though I'm a litigator, I've now picked up some privacy regulatory stuff.
Mhm.
The second point I was going to make is that certain transitions are easier, and employers, whether it's your current employer or a future employer, are going to be much more amenable to. Like, look, if you're a patent litigator and you're trying to jump into M&A, good luck with that. I mean,
Mhm.
that's just not a realistic transition. If, as Ann said, if you're a litigator going into product or regulatory, makes perfect sense.
Mhm.
Same thing if you're a product going into privacy, if you're product counsel going into privacy or AI, makes perfect sense. And so those sorts of transitions are much easier to facilitate and to make happen. I think the like, look, as you go through your career as a lawyer, or any career really, but especially as a lawyer, you start off being sort of paid and having a job to do certain tasks. I do document review, to take it way back, or I draft contracts or whatever. And then the further you get along in your career, and this is true at the sub GC level too, you transition, and it's a gradual transition. It doesn't happen overnight, where it's less about what you do and more about what you know. And I don't mean like the substantive knowledge, but more about the judgment and wisdom that you have, those skills that you've developed over the years. And as you sort of establish yourself as, hey, I'm a lawyer with really strong judgment skills, and most strong lawyers have really good judgment. Then you are going to be trusted that, okay, they knew how to do healthcare regulatory work. Transitioning from healthcare regulatory work to, say, fintech regulatory work is not nearly the leap that it was, or it might be for somebody earlier in their career.
Mhm.
Yeah.
What about LLM? Like an LLM in privacy or AI laws, that like that advanced degree carry more weight?
Never say
I,
never, but I've never seen a client
Mm-mm.
focus on, oh, they've got an LLM. We would consider them versus not having that LLM. I would think of it as kind of a similar to a certification, maybe marginally better.
I
I
think
think
the
the one thing
benefit,
where it could, yeah, go ahead, Shannon. You
Yeah.
haven't
Yeah.
you haven't
I think
spoken. Go for it.
the benefit to any of that might be networking and who you might meet doing that. And I think probably an LLM might be better than a certificate that you could bang out at home on the computer. But beyond that, and I think there might be real benefit to networking, because I think the thing people should think about with transitions of any kind is you have to think through the middle steps of a transition. It's easy to say, like, I want to go to this practice and I'm in this practice, but often it takes more than one job move to get there. And
Mhm.
so what can you do? How can you use the tangents of your current practice to move there iteratively? I think is one piece. The other piece that has been sort of brought up a little bit is you're probably going to have to make that transition on your own through your own networking and not through a recruiter who's being paid by the organization to find someone who checks 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 boxes.
Yep.
So to that extent, I do think perhaps CLEs, LLMs, certifications and classes could have some benefit on who else you might be meeting in them. But to me, that would probably be the biggest benefit.
And
You
there are
know,
other reasons. Sorry, go ahead, Ann.
oh, I just want to say one thing. I had this thought, Shannon, about Paragon and temporary. I have seen lawyers make transition to other practices by taking a role like a temporary, were you going to say that wrong? Like a temporary
I was
role
going to ask
doing
that question.
privacy. Yeah. And it's great because they find they love it or some practice area and they really can sell it then for a permanent role.
Yeah. I think there's I think that's true. And especially in markets like this, and I would say that the temporary market mostly follows the perm market in many ways. It's not true that that they're sort of counter-cyclical. One thing I would say about perm and or temporary, especially in tricky markets like this one, is you are still primarily going to be hired for the skills you already have, even on a contract basis.
Yeah.
And companies that are using contractors who want to hire in that way are apt to be interested in bringing someone on who can maybe triage A, B, and C, and you need to have A, B, and C to even get a look or get in the door. But if you can get in the door, then, which by the way is a multi-week interview process versus a multi-month interview process. So from a cash flow perspective, there's benefits there, depending on your situation. But I do think that we see many people who, once they get in the door and kind of show their chops, especially on the soft skills like Mark was saying,
Yeah.
then they get to take on other areas that maybe are of interest or maybe aren't of interest that they're being asked to take on as well. But I would also add that if you, any kind of transition, whether perm, contract, my experience is that the smaller the team, the more apt that is to happen for you as well. So you kind of want to put yourself in situations where there isn't already an expert in the area you're trying to get into, so that your judgment and your ability to learn on the fly, speak for letting you take a crack at it or kind of being the person who's going to run point on it. I think the larger the team, the more apt there is to be SMEs in those areas. And if there's somebody who's better suited to it than you, it's just probably unlikely to happen. So I guess the long and short of it is it can happen on contract work, but you still have to get in through what you're already good at. Yeah.
And
Makes
maybe the
sense.
benefit of smaller teams is just smaller teams are smaller teams. Let's just start with that. So
Yeah.
whatever comes in
Whatever your
or
role
that
is,
needs to get
whatever your role
handled,
is.
right?
Yeah.
Like, it's all like Luke Skywalker and with Darth Vader with the objects being thrown and he's got the lightsaber, right? And the things are hitting him. That's a small team. People have to be adaptable. They have to do other things. That also creates the opportunity if you're there to do transaction work. If something
Totally.
comes up and they need help over there, you can pivot and do some of that work. Just to close out on certifications and then move forward, I don't think any of us are saying these things are not helpful, like in the sense that like personal education, getting stronger in a skill, particularly like the new IAPP certification in AI. If you don't know anything about AI, that's going to be a skill that you need to know, that we all need to know as we go forward. So there's nothing wrong with it. It just may not get you the job. It may help strengthen your skills. What's going to get you the job is not necessarily your skills, it's you. right? It's more than that. So let's talk about that. There are people, though, who are in the middle of transitions right now, right? Either because their employer let them go, or the government changed what it's doing, right? And they're in the position of repositioning a bit, not made necessarily through choice, right? Let's talk for a
Mhm.
moment just about government lawyers, and maybe Shannon, I could start with you, and just think about like what are some of the key challenges that they may face as they're starting to position themselves to a private employer for that next role, and how can they think about how to position that optimally for them?
Yeah, I think this is a really hard one. Anna and Anne have mentioned, and that, most of the time, especially when recruiters are involved, we are looking for people coming from the same or adjacent industries. And so that can put, government folks on the back foot a little bit. I think rightly or wrongly, there's the perception that government is slow moving. It's potentially more focused on process versus outcomes. They may or may not be, revenue focused in any way. And so that's very different than your kind of traditional for-profit organization. Um, and I think that is really hard to overcome. I don't think that can be overstated. And people do it, and they do it successfully. And I think, like anything else, once you get that first job, it's really in the rear view in many ways. If you want it to be, it's just kind of getting that first leap in. So I guess my advice would be, one, be really open-minded about what that first job may be. And that first job doesn't have to be the last job. But once you're in the private sector, I think it becomes much easier to stay there. Um, I think that something people should think about folks with government experience is that the government is also not necessarily known for being the most resource rich environment. And people are often having to, make things work without the support they would get in like a big law firm or a large organization. And so that those skills are in demand, whatever level you at, whether you're a contractor or firm. People want folks who will get in the business, who will, the days of wanting to turn things over to an assistant and things like that, that's just not something people are really looking for in any of their hires these days. So I think being able to roll up your sleeves and show ways you've been able to do that is key. And probably government folks have really great experience in that area. I would say project management is probably an area where they're also strong, being able to kind of get A to B, and corral the many corners of bureaucracy. And so I think being able to tell that story, being able to kind of equate that to internal stakeholders and people who may be reticent to legal's involvement and things like that is all going to be key. And I do think the last thing I would say is on your resume, and this goes for folks in the private sector as well, the more you can show results that you are responsible for, so that are quantifiable in some way, I think the better. So if you have, you were responsible for implementing a new technology or a new system that reduced your turnaround time, or, achieve some sort of cost savings, or you managed a team, or you built a team, all of that is going to be really transferable to the private sector. And you want to make sure that that's on your resume. And you also want to make sure that your resume is in as layman's terms as possible. So cool the acronyms to the extent that you can, and use terms that are familiar to folks who are in the private sector, so stakeholders and things like that, I think would be key. It is doable, and I would say most people that do it, they network with other people who have done it. So that's
Yeah.
really key. Find that person that that's already been there and figure out how they did it, and be willing to take that first job that maybe isn't exactly what you want, because it could be the launch pad for where you really want to go.
Yeah, I love what you said about focusing on some of those outcomes and not just the tasks. I think that's a challenge for all lawyers, honestly, and legal
Yeah.
professionals in general. You tend to get resumes as a hiring manager, and they're like, I did X transactions, I looked at X laws, X, Y. You got to remember, every single person who's applying for that job, if they're qualified to do that job, probably did exactly the same thing.
Yes.
So yes, that's got to be there, but you also have to explain the outcomes that you drove and the results. And that when you're
Hmm.
thinking about going in-house, and especially if you're transitioning from a government job, as you said, there are some biases or at least assumptions people have about what that means. Many of those assumptions may not even be correct, but
No, they're
they're
not.
there. And so you want to show you're solutions focused, you're pragmatic, you're collaborative, you're up to the work culture and pace. You're not just a naysayer who's like, here's a law and you need to follow it, but here I can come up with creative solutions for helping you follow it. And then take the experience that you already have. Maybe it was litigation and break it down. Like, what does that say about you? I'm able to risk manage, to triage, to handle multiple projects at once, to internalize stakeholder goals and drive results. Figure out how to tell that story with the experience you already have, but put it in language that the business is going to relate to, right? How the job of in-house counsel is how to enable the business goals while managing the risk, not necessarily conquering the risk in all cases. We wish that was the case. That would make life a lot easier, but at least managing it. And if you can, if you're able to do that, and I love your suggestion of talking to people who've actually done it, colleagues of yours come from the same department who've landed somewhere, right? Just reach out on LinkedIn and say, hey, I'm making this transition. Would you be willing at least to talk to me? Not about necessarily placing me, finding a job, but would you be willing to talk to me and just tell me what worked for you, right?
Yeah.
I also want to add something, which is it's a very interesting time to be transitioning from a government job to something else, be it in-house, be it back to a law firm, whatever. And it kind of cuts both ways here. On the one side, you've got, oh, this is somebody who's working at, I don't know, CDC, FDA, whatever, pick your government agency. It's completely reasonable that that person would be looking to transition now. Maybe they're being laid off. Maybe it's just not a pleasant environment, whatever. Makes total sense. Whereas in the past, I think people might be a little bit, like, does this person really want to, do they really want to transition, or is this just somebody putting out feelers? So, like, I think people would view the interest as serious. On the flip side, this cuts the other way. The hiring folks might be like, well, this person really wants to be in the government. They're only looking to leave now because they're kind of feel like they have to. And so I think it's good to be aware of these factors. As Shannon kind of got at, like, I've said this, it is not going to be, you're going to encounter additional hurdles. It's a little like when people are coming straight from a law firm. I tell people, like, the two hardest in-house jobs to get are the first in-house job and the GC role. Once you're sort of in-house, it's easier to move both within a company and across companies. And so, like, thinking to, you might think about those, okay, what are those interim, whether it's temporary or a permanent role, but it might not be the exact role that you want. It's something that you think you would be really interested in, or it's a company that you're really interested in, maybe more important than, like, focusing on what that dream job is.
And knowing the company in the industry, showing that you know it, like not just the government perspective or the last employer perspective, or even the specialization that you're moving out of over to the new one. Like, I am always super impressed as a hiring manager when someone can come in and talk intelligently about the industry, the company I'm in, some of the problems and challenges we're facing. Not that hard, honestly, to get some of that information. I'll suggest some when we get to the AI topic, which is coming up, but like, super impressive and differentiating because many people don't. I think lawyers often fall into the trap, and legal professionals generally fall into the trap of thinking my resume and my skills speak for themselves. I totally get it. You've worked really hard. You've earned the stripes, right? They don't, though. I mean, I had my last job that I had here, which was a senior job that I was hiring for. We got 800 resumes for that position. All of those people, many of them super qualified, 800, right? All had very similar experience. So you've got to find that, what is the thing about you that's differentiating? And it's knowledge of the company. It's how you show up in that interview. It's your follow through. It's your relation of the experience to the job and answering the question that's presented by the job, which is not where have you been, but where are you going to, and why is it here, and why is this job exactly the right one for you? Which is partly a positioning question. Maybe we should start to move and pivot in that direction, just looking at the time. Mark, beyond a resume and LinkedIn, are there some effective strategies to network and find positions? And I'll talk a little bit about AI.
Yeah. So I think the number one thing is like, people talk about networking as if it's just this, like, behemoth. Like, there is a one size fits all approach to networking, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I think the thing to do is to find things that are authentic to you, which is like, and so if you're extrovert and love to meet new people, yeah, and you want to go hang out at conferences, but whether they be virtual or in real time, I think that's a great way to network. I personally don't like that type of networking. Like I go to a conference and it's like, get me out of here. I mean, and I'm not an introvert, I'm not an extrovert either. I'm kind of in the middle. But that sort of environment just does not give me energy. And so therefore I don't really engage. And I'm sure when I do engage there, it feels forced. I think like, but figuring out like, like what are the types of environments that you like to engage in? If it's more one-on-one type situations, then, reach out to folks on LinkedIn. I think an underutilized type of networking is really sort of reconnecting with folks that have been in your network in the past, whether you worked with them or they're just at interesting companies or whatever. But like people who you had genuine affinity for, like reach out to those folks even and have what I would call an agendaless conversation. You're just like, hey, reconnecting with folks, and you don't actually like, yeah, you want to reconnect with them and because you're thinking about making a move or whatever, but really the point of the conversation is just to reconnect with them and see where the conversation goes.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who want to help. I mean, like
There are.
people are often focused, right? Like I've got to get this job, so I'm committing an act of networking, so to speak, rather than talking. But like literally just reaching out to people, even in an industry you want to get to, and just saying, hey, will you spend 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever, or could buy you a cup of coffee or at least talk to you? Sure, not everyone's going to say yes, right? And you got to have a decent pitch, but like even if it's just I want to pick your brain, like what can I do? Do you know anybody? Here's what I'm looking for. Can you help me think about this? Like people are surprisingly generous with their time if you ask. Most people don't ask. But be specific about what you're asking for. This is what I'm looking for. This is what I want to know. Do you have the time and you spend it with me? Did anyone want to throw one in? And I saw
Yeah.
you unmuted.
I also think, Ron, when you do take people's time, it's really nice to make sure that you show gratitude for their time, but it is
Right.
amazing how many people will give their time. And it's a little shocking when I say to people, well, even not in legal, reach out to CMOs at companies you're interested in, see if for marketing roles. But back to the networking, when I'm working with candidates and trying to help them, I think they need to create, I think it's a marketing plan for themselves. And
Mhm.
what that involves is the first thing is an Excel document or whatever, Google Sheets, whatever you use with everyone people you went to law school with, find out where those people are. And like Mark said, reconnect with them. Or, so many people like you guys have had these careers where you've worked with so many incredible business people that
Mhm.
if you had to look for new jobs, you would ping them just to reconnect potentially. And so clients of big companies you work for and everyone really it works, and I get people every day that are introducing me from colleagues that know me that I might know a candidate. So people are really trying to help each other out.
Absolutely.
And if
And
you don't already know the people, I think, one of the things that you can do is pick industries where maybe the mission resonates with you. And when you're reaching out to these people, you can say, well, I'm at an inflection point in my career and I'm particularly interested in this company because I don't know, I have a passion for, renewable energy and climate and would love to pick your brain for 10 minutes or 15 minutes over Zoom or buy you a coffee. But if you have a little bit of a hook, right?
Mhm.
If they know why you're, reaching out, maybe because of some common connection or whatnot, even if you don't know them and you don't have a background with them, that's helpful, I find.
I would just add, if you do have an ask, and not every conversation has an obvious ask, but if you do have an ask, be super explicit about it because sometimes I get calls and I feel like someone's sort of like dancing around a question or they're kind of asking for something, but they're not quite saying it. And I don't necessarily want to be presumptuous. So And I think back to 20-year-old me, and I know I did the exact same thing because I was just too afraid to say the thing I wanted, which was, can you introduce me to so and so? Could you submit my resume for that job? So I think if you have something you're looking for, especially if you're looking for something unique from that particular person, like there's only this person can get it for you, or you think they're your best angle to get it, make sure they know so that they can make good on it if they can. I think, we've talked before about like vague asks are really hard
Hmm.
to execute on, even if you want to be helpful,
Right.
if you just don't really know. So put it out there. If you have a clear ask, put it out there.
Why don't we move on and take a little bit of a pivot and talk a little bit about how you can use AI for networking and job searching in general. And I have the pole position on that topic, so I'll talk a little bit about it. First, let me say this could be like a 60 minutes in itself, right? Like there are
Yeah.
webinars on this. I'm going to try and do it in 5 to 7 minutes and just give you 3 or 4 tips that hopefully will be helpful to you. I think first we need to acknowledge a lot of people use AI now. There are a lot of tools out there like Resume AI, Teal, Jasper, Kick Resume, JobScan that can take job descriptions and sort of you know, adjust your resume on the fly to try to match keywords and so on and so forth. There are companies that are increasingly saying, I don't want resumes that have been prepared by AI. I don't want cover letters that have been prepared by AI. I don't consider that ethical. I want to see your work product. So you should be aware of that and be aware of the companies that you're applying to and what their policies or practices are around that. There's also a practical consideration. If you're putting something into an AI engine, it may end up sounding like every other job application that went into that AI engine, right? Because it's operating statistically to try to pick words and frame things. But there are some one use that I think is actually pretty useful, and you don't need to use one of those specialized tools to do it. And that's literally to take the job description and take your resume and put in a prompt something like, I've just uploaded a resume and a job description. You're the hiring manager for the job. Compare my resume and the job and tell me from your perspective how much it aligns with the job experience. What are the gaps and missing information that are underrepresented? What are the areas that are vague, overly general, could be made more impactful, and suggest ways to describe my prior experience in ways that better align with the role? You could do that for just about any job, and that allows you on your own, right? Not necessarily running it through the tool that makes all the changes for you, but on your own to bring some intelligence to it and customize your resume so it fits the job. Again, the resume is supposed to be telling them, this is why I want this job. And one of the things I see the most as a hiring manager is resumes that are for another job because they were written for a generic and they come in and they say something like, the job is to be deputy general counsel of transaction. And it starts with experienced board member and general counsel.
Yeah.
That, of course, that person has that experience, but they may not be able to relate it. And did you want to say something on this point?
Oh no, I was just thinking about I'm doing a search for an AI company, and the general counsel said to me, "Well, Ann, this is really a great candidate, but there's not AI on the resume."
Mm-hmm.
Like there was no AI on his product counseling experience, but in a separate document, I had asked him to highlight it, and he had like a full page
Full
of
page.
what he'd been doing, and it was a resume probably he did very generically. So anyway,
Mhm.
just a
Yeah.
thought about that.
I think, even if you don't use AI to automate all those changes, which, as I
Yeah.
said, can have some ethical issues, it is helpful to have a resume that's tailored to the job description, not only so it's easy for the hiring manager, but because going back to that example I gave, if there are 800 resumes and I got to sort through them, I'm going to look for the ones that are the most relevant right off the bat. And that's helpful. So you got your resume in, right? You got your LinkedIn profile up to date. How do you identify and research companies and trends? Lots of ways to do that, but just to name a few, you can use a tool like perplexity.ai, which is basically like Google search, but with an AI interface on it, and ask it, tell me the companies that are, most prominent in this subject matter area that, are of this size or this series or whatever. You can also ask it for trends. What are the legal trends that Series C companies in health tech are facing right now? And it will spit it out. with reference in the case of Perplexity to the source document. So you can go back and read the underlying TechCrunch or whatever, find out and do your market research up front. Of course, if it's a public company, they have public filings. Your 10Qs, your 10Ks are probably your best place to look for things like risk factors and economics. But it can be hard to sort through all of that. But here's where AI can really help you. Okay. So one of the tools I think like everybody should use, and I'm not doing an official endorsement, but my goodness, you should see this thing. Google Notebook LM. Okay. Google Notebook LM comes in a free version and it comes in a for pay version. The free version lets you create notebooks with up to 50 sources, and those sources can be PDFs like that SEC document. It can be web pages. It can be YouTube videos. It can be pretty much anything you can upload into the notebook. Once it's there, the AI can let you search it. So you and answer questions about it. Who are the executives at this company? What are their top financial issues? What are their top legal risks? You can do that on the fly. And if that was all it could do, I feel like I'm in one of those Ronco commercials, but that's not all. If that was all it could do, that would be pretty good. But it also can, at the click of a button, generate an FAQ, an abstract of all of that information condensed by subject matter, a timeline if you want one. And this is the killer feature. If you're trying to learn about this company and you're on your way into the interview, you click a button and it will make a podcast of two people talking about all of that information in a completely digestible way that you can use. You listen to it on your way to your interview. And then when you're at your interview, you can talk all about that company and that industry like a pro. And this is free. Like it's available right on the internet. So you can go just get that and check it out right now. I think it's a pretty cool tool for many, many, many reasons. I don't know if anyone else has used it. I'll just.
I was gonna say I've used it, but because I am who I am, I had it make a podcast about me, which was somebody else suggested it. It was freaking hilarious. But I do think your use is a much better, a much better one. I mean, I think, and you maybe you could speak to this. Like I was thinking about, Ann was talking about the marketing plan. Like that's a great use for AI. It feels like help me devise a marketing plan for how I go out and present myself and things like that, which is sort of tangential to what you've been talking about.
I think there's absolutely no excuse for any candidate that goes into any interview right now and doesn't know about a company and hasn't like listened or learned everything about it. Even in initial calls with recruiters, when I'm like, have you studied this company? They're like, no, it just seems interesting. Like it takes 2 seconds with AI now to learn about, or 5 minutes to study a company to be able to speak intelligently about it with all these tools. So it's just amazing.
Your competition's doing it, so you have to do it too.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. Speaking of which, final tip, and then we'll go on and talk a little bit about flexible talent, Shannon. Practicing for interviews, right? You're not going to use AI during the interview, right? And not have it up there asking ChatGPT what is a good answer. No, that's just silly. But before the interview, you can absolutely practice. And one of the coolest ways you can do this is many of the AI tools that are out there, things like Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, Claude, and so on, have voice interfaces. Gemini has one. Voice interfaces where you can actually chat with the AI tool using your voice. And that means you can also prompt it. So if you put in a prompt like this, I'm preparing for an interview for a legal leadership role. I'm going to upload the job description now. Present me with a series of typical high-quality interview questions, including behavioral, situational, and legal strategy questions I am likely to be asked based on this role. After each question, I want you to pause so I can answer it aloud. When I finish, evaluate my response. I want you to assess the clarity, the conciseness, the relevance, the executive presence, and how well I framed legal insights in a business context, and suggest ways to improve my answer. And then at the end of that, ask me whether I want to try again or go on to the next question. You can do that today, free tool right off the internet, and you can practice so that when you get in front of that interviewer, you have rehearsed this, you have actually practiced talking it through, you've received feedback, And it's super helpful because it's judgment-free repetition. You can role play tough questions like, why am I leaving public service? The lack of direct experience that relates to a particular aspect of the role if you're concerned about. How do you make the case for your business acumen? You can practice all of that, and AI can be like a little coach that helps you in the background before the interview, not during the interview, but before the interview. All of these things, the prep, the finding out about the company, the coming in prepared, all this is just about giving you that extra leg up so that you are differentiated from others. And with so many people looking right now, that's super helpful. Okay, I have a question. If I can please list the AI tools. Boy, that might be a little bit of a challenge here, but I will try to get some of them out into the chat room while I ask Shannon the next question, and then I'll put them in there. Shannon, maybe you could talk a little bit
Mm.
about flexible talent, like how you hinted on it earlier, but how do I get involved with that? Like, what's the principal advantage to it? And do people land roles directly through that, or is it really more like, well, that's something that can help you with a pivot for later, and then I'll try to put some of those tools into the chat while you're answering.
Yeah, I think there's two kind of buckets oversimplifying here. There's sort of the freelance bucket, which candidly is the area I know less about, but that's kind of the marketplaces, that's putting yourself out there to do, contract here and there. It's largely on your own time. And I think that can be great if you're kind of dabbling or thinking about it. Where we focus and where many other ALSPs focus is really the secondment type model. And so that type of contract work in many ways looks very similar to working as an FTE. So you are working at the direction of the organization. It's sort of 9 to 5 in it for the most part. You do have more flexibility in the sense that there's, you can kind of opt in on the duration and things like that. But you should expect it to kind of look like a quote real job, as I've heard it said before. How you get involved for the most part, that's going to be through agencies. So, Paragon's obviously one of them, MLA, Axiom, Kerwin, there's a number that are out there. You can AI search them, and I've done that, and they'll all pop up for you. I think what people should think about, contract work is a great way to keep your resume fresh. It's a great way to make money. It's a great way to stay relevant. It's a great way to prevent gaps. It's a great way to get into a new industry. It's a great way to expand your skill sets. And it's changed very much in the time I've been doing it. So I think it's generally viewed very favorably on a resume. And it can certainly be additive in terms of your skills and things like that. What I would say for people, or just something to think about, is we get asked a lot of questions about like hanging a shingle and how does that relate to contract work. If you want to continue practicing law, I suggest if you are interested in contract work, you go the route of an agency or an ALSP, because there you can really focus on actually practicing law. We take care of your benefits, we do your payroll, we chase down, the clients for billing and things like that. I think what people don't realize about hanging a shingle is you are a part-time lawyer. You are now a business owner. So you are the HR department, you're the IT department, you are really everything. And so if you like that, that's fantastic. And that would be a great way to go. You have to also love developing business. If you really want to focus on practicing law, I think, stick with the sort of more traditional, non-traditional route of ALSPs.
And how did this
I don't
engage?
know if that.
I was going to ask, how did those engagements work? Let's say I'm working for company A and I'm still interviewing because I want a permanent role
Yeah.
with company B, or company A wants to make me an offer. Am I
Yeah.
at a disadvantage because I'm working for flexible talent for
Yeah.
company A in either of those situations? How does that work?
Yeah. I mean, your reputation is everything, right? So if you make a commitment, you should see that commitment through, whether you've accepted a perm offer or a contract. And I think there's more opportunity, as long as you're forthcoming about what your ultimate plans are, we can work to find you something that, might make sense that you can interview while you're still doing this contract. I think there's also, I would say probably a third of the contract placements I've made in my career have gone perm at one point or another. So some of them are structured as temp to perm, some of them kind of happen more organically. The organizations I've worked at, it's considered a win if you get an FTE role through that role contract. So, there's no disadvantage there. It's a potential another avenue in, and I've seen it be successful many times. So, I would encourage people to think about that.
And there was a question in the chat room, what's an ALSP?
An ALSP is an alternative legal services provider, and they're not all focused on staffing or placement, but for those of us in the room, that's our area.
And we have a question for the panel in the Q&A. When applying for jobs, I feel like many companies view me as overqualified for certain jobs. I am a commercial lawyer, and while I am about 30 years out of law school, so a lot of experience, I want to continue to do deal work and not be primarily managing other lawyers. Any suggestions for how to address this on a resume? Yeah, this is a pretty common challenge, isn't it? Because you often see like when I see job applications, they'll say, ideally, I want 7 to 12 years of experience, and I'm like, question, what happens after 12 years of experience, right? What is the right answer to that, folks? Like, how would you approach that?
I think the wrong answer is not to put your date of graduation or to try to suggest that you don't have, the 30 years of experience that you do, because ultimately it's going to reveal itself at some point during your interview process. So just be candid, and you can condense your earlier experience into a section that's called, earlier, experience or private practice experience, and then where you just sort of condense, and then you really go into more detail on the more recent experience. So that's one thing. And the other is along the lines of what we talked about before, which is for every job, if this is a commercial transactions job, you really focus on that experience and you underplay some of the things that could be detractors. Like, don't say that you've managed a team of 15. Because that's going to scare them off, right? Because they're going to think, well, someone who's managed a team of 15 and has been a general counsel, they're just looking to sit out this market. But ultimately, a year from now, when the market improves or however long, they're going to be looking for greener pastures. So really focus on the experience that the client or prospective employer is looking for, and really sort of de-emphasize some of the things that could make them a little bit more reticent to hire you.
So unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the perspective of the people listening, we have come to the end of our hour together. I'm going to share, let me see if I can do this successfully. I don't know what I'm sharing. I'm sharing the wrong thing. I will try to share the right document in a moment just to share with folks the contact information, excuse me, for some of our retained recruiters on this call. So let me see if I can do that. Okay. There you go. If you want it, obviously this isn't a commercial webinar, but obviously these people do retain searches and are retained by companies to help engage folks. So if they can be of use to you, feel free to reach out to them. I want to personally thank Anne and Anna, Mark and Shannon, who not only put a lot of time in prep into this, but also took time away from their very busy schedules. And Anne was telling us earlier she had literally lost her voice on Saturday. I wasn't even sure she was going to be here. So thank you, Anne, for doing that. That was amazing. I also want to thank Collective Health, who's my employer, for letting us use their Zoom room. We couldn't do that without that, so we really appreciate it. And I want to thank all of you for hanging in here with us. Hopefully, we gave you some ideas you can use and some tools you can use. And either way, we're wishing everybody the best of luck and looking forward to hearing about your success sooner rather than later. That's the name of the game. Hope this has been useful to you, and take care.
Thank you, Ron.
Thanks, Ron.